Greetings, my dear viewers. The myth, the fascination of CP2. Perhaps a brief explanation of what that means. I've already said cross-plane two-cylinder. It's an engine that translates this cross-plane, if you want to imagine it. The crankshaft has a crankpin offset, in this case 270 degrees. So it is positioned normally. So cross-plane, the horizontal plane. What does that do? I think it makes a huge difference to the sound of a normal inline two-cylinder engine.
Yes, correct. So this crankpin offset means that the firing order is slightly different and it de facto simulates a V2 sound. So we know that everyone knows a Ducati or the SV650 for that matter. They all have a 90-degree V2 and you automatically get that Ducati sound. And that V2 sound comes out. And this engine, although it's not a V engine, simulates exactly this firing order and this sound, even though it's an inline design. So the cylinders are positioned like this and not like that. And yet it sounds exactly like a V2 because you get this firing order through the crankpin offset.
Exactly. And you mentioned the sound, so you can hear it very well. And you also mentioned Ducati. And the reason why I think you mentioned Ducati is the mid-90s. In the mid-90s, Yamaha had already installed this crankpin offset in the TRX 850. And back then it was simply intended to attack the Italians, let's call it by its name, where it hurts them the most, namely passion, emotion. An inline two-cylinder, but with the attitude of a V-twin engine. And now this CP2 engine from Yamaha has been in the Yamaha range for almost 10 years. And I am incredibly happy. And that's not just because of the sound, as you've already positively pointed out, that it sounds great, but also because of the other special features. And in this case, Yamaha has done a good job of simply generating a narrow torque from the offset of the crankpin. If you just look at the data sheet, I don't think it's that noticeable. We have 68 Newton meters of torque at 6,500 RPM. Yamaha specifies 73.4 horsepower at 8,750 RPM. That's an engine where I say, on paper, yes, it's even suitable for beginners, it's lower mid-range. But for the last 10 years, this engine has been enjoying incredible popularity, and rightly so, because it also has such a good push from the bottom, because it generates an incredible amount of power in the mid-rev range and also revs out beautifully at the top. That's amazing, isn't it?
Yes, that's exactly how it is. This engine has incredible flexibility, in other words, and is still very smooth running. Well, the principle of the V2 at the bottom, it normally runs a bit rough. They've somehow got a better handle on that. In other words, you get the sound of a V2, but not quite with this roughness. It's just a bit better solved. And I have to say, I mean, the engine has been in the MT-07 for 10 years now. And I think it's one of the best, Land Road engines, especially in terms of price performance ratio, because what you get on paper is not something that will blow you away or scare you, but it's such a nice power delivery. And we don't have a ride-by-wire, but a completely normal after-throttle cable, and we don't have any electronics or anything like that. We can't adjust any modes either, and I don't think you have to with this engine. It doesn't even need it because the engine is simply perfectly tuned for every country road rider. Whether you're riding in touring mode, as in the Tracer 7 GT, or perhaps a little more sporty, the MT-07, it works every time. The engine is really responsive, has an incredibly nice linear power delivery, and doesn't really have any weaknesses in my eyes. And you've already mentioned it anyway, this narrow bottom end also makes it the perfect rear wheel machine if you want to ride a bit on the rear wheel or something like that, I think.
I think we can already move on to the comparison with that. Incidentally, 689 cubic capacity, we haven't mentioned that yet. So it really is an actual engine, and I don't even want to say that it's a motorcycle because we have two completely different concepts here. But the engine is a starter, which I would actually give to a beginner without hesitation by telling him or her that the engine pushes nicely, but it won't scare you. And I mean, we are more experienced bikers and we still have an incredible amount of fun with it. And that's the transition to the MT-07. And you've said it. Just give it a go. Pull up, lift the front wheel up. It really does that by itself. You should actually do it in second gear with the clutch. You can do it anyway, no problem, but in first gear, it also pushes. And that's when you lean back and want it to. It just does it in the MT-07, in the Tracer 7. It doesn't like it so much because we have a bit more weight at the front. I don't even want to go into which one I think is better with the engine. I'd like to stay with the MT-07, which has gotten better and better over the generations. In fact, you have to say that now, as a Euro 5 tuned engine, I think it is at the peak of its culture. It's an engine that's powerful and really gets going, but it's also very easy to ride and behaves very well. And in the Tracer 7, it really has its purpose. Because I think a touring bike like the Tracer 7 wants to be, you don't necessarily want to feel and have any vibrations and discomfort. And since there are no differences in terms of the engine, you have to say it's the riding position. The riding position once on the MT-07, a bit further forward, on the Tracer 7 more comfortable. But which one do you feel more comfortable with?
Well, I have to say I have my own approach to this topic because I think that a lot of riders opt for the MT-07 because it still has a very good price-performance ratio, of course, and I think the naked bike look also appeals to an incredible number of people. However, I believe that a relatively large number of riders will actually theoretically be better off on the Tracer 7, especially those who now say they want a bit more comfort without compromising. I believe that they actually ride better with the Tracer 7. The only sticking point is that the Tracer 7 has a higher seating position than the MT-07. What seat height does the MT-07 have?
The seat height is 805 millimeters and 840 millimeters.
Yes, we're talking about 3.5 centimeters difference. That makes a big difference for smaller riders. And that's why I think it's a very, very accessible bike, the MT-07. The Tracer is just as accessible. It's just that little bit higher. And now I could imagine that some people have bought it, maybe one or two ladies or people who have slightly shorter legs, because it's easier for them to get down than on the Tracer. Although they would probably like to have the comfort of the Tracer. Because personally, when I switch, I immediately notice the difference. You sit more upright, as you've already said, and I always have a bit of that light supermoto feeling on the Tracer. And that makes it a bit more comfortable for me when cornering and so on, and almost more lively because I sit a bit more upright. And I feel a bit more mobility, so to speak, but without any loss of comfort. So for me personally, if I had to choose, I would almost always go for the Tracer 7, because I also have long legs and can get down without any problems. But I understand that some people might say that it's a little too high for me, and I think that's perhaps the main difference apart from the price. The Tracer 7 is a bit more expensive than the MT-07, but I think both are extremely fairly priced for what you get. And as I said, the engine is the same, and I think the engine is actually the main purchase factor for both bikes, because this engine is just really, really good. And there's absolutely no difference between the two.
I also think the engine should, or even maybe the main selling point, because it's so good. I just think that on the MT-07 you have a more front wheel oriented engine than on the Tracer 7, but still very upright. It's only when you switch to the Tracer 7 that you notice that you're really upright. And I think the seat height, well, it's difficult for me to estimate how small you have to be for the Tracer 7 to actually feel too high. I don't think it's too high though, but in terms of weight, it's also great. The MT-07 weighs 184 kilos, the Tracer 7, 196 kilos. That's a difference of just 12 kilos. That means that in reality, in truth, it's a very light bike and has these touring advantages, and so I would say on the windshield, which is logically a bit wider on the side than on the MT-07. That means you've already protected your legs well and the windshield is amazing. That's great. It's really big. And you have infinitely variable adjustment. It's so easy to pull up. It goes all the way up. It's unbelievable how wide and high it gets. So it's wide and stays that way, but it goes up high. And then you can simply lock it in each step and it stays there. I think that's brilliant on what is, it has to be said, a comparatively inexpensive motorcycle, because other touring bikes cost a lot more. And yet they have given the Tracer 7 this seriousness, I think. Weight and handling are easy cheesy, but longer wheelbase 1460 compared to 14. I mean, as Yamaha, as a manufacturer, you have to take it seriously, so to speak, that such motorcycles are ridden by people who actually want a touring motorcycle and don't just want the engine to be as sporty and agile as it is, but it comes into its own even better in the MT-07. Philip, perhaps we'll also take a quick look at something that didn't cause us any problems at all. The tires. we have strapped on standard tires. In other words, we have a standard tire on the MT-07.
There we have the Michelin Road 6, and on the Tracer 7 GT, easy to remember, we have the Road 6 GT. The difference, you could say, is that the GT tire has a stronger carcass and is intended for slightly heavier motorcycles, for touring motorcycles if you ride a lot with luggage or a passenger, so that gives you that extra bit of feedback, so to speak, because the carcass is a bit harder and adapted to the heavier load. And that's wonderful, but you said it quite rightly, this is a sport touring tire, so it's more or less a real all-rounder. 100% silica content, which means it's perfect for the wet. You can also see that in the profile they have really come up with a lot of ideas. This is a tire that should work just as well in wet conditions and at lower temperatures. So it's perfect for touring riders. And since the MT-07 and also the Tracer 7 with their almost 74 horsepower are not necessarily the best rockets in terms of top-end performance, the tires can easily cope with the power and torque. So I don't think we ever got into any kind of dangerous situation. In my opinion, the tire is an absolutely great all-rounder, which is also good for sporty driving in the city and also lasts a relatively long time. I wouldn't use it for a track day, to be honest. I would go for something more sporty.
Michelin has different models then too, if you want to put it that way, because if you want a more durable tire that can still be used for MT-07 sporty riding, then that's the one for you. I just wanted to say that we now have technologies on such all-round tires that were previously or recently reserved for high-end tires. 2 CT+, 2 compound technologies at the rear, where the harder medium rubber compound is pushed underneath the softer one, which means that the stability is there. And interestingly enough, in case anyone is wondering about this tread pattern and thinks it looks like it's only suitable for the rain, we have these Everlast sipes, which have a certain width when new, and the more the tread is worn down, the more this tread pattern then widens out, so to speak. So the negative tread percentage remains the same, by the way. 14% negative spacing. This is the successor to the Road 5, which was already insanely popular, and rightly so. And the Road 6 only makes it even better. So back to the 2 Yamahas, as I said, this is the first part. We'll do a second part about this phenomenon, Fascination Myth CP2, and you can then come to a conclusion about which model you prefer. I mean, you actually already said it at the beginning. For me personally, it would be the MT-07, which I would prefer to have with this engine because it emphasizes the sporty character of the engine. As cultivated as it is and as pleasant as it is to ride, it still brings out this sporty side in the MT-07. And then I like to rev it up a bit more and push it. And in terms of the riding position and also 12 kilos less, I simply have the sportier machine than the Tracer 7, which I also think looks beautiful. I don't quite understand why Yamaha didn't adopt this look for the Tracer 9, but it is nice for all Tracer 7 fans and all people who want to buy one, maybe also because we are talking about the Tracer 7 in a very, very positive and euphoric way. It's a good bike. So for all those who also like the look, it looks incredibly good. Elegant. I think they've even taken the front from the sports bikes. And in terms of the controls, we now have a color TFT display on both the MT-07 and the Tracer 7. Super readable, imitates an analog tachometer. They've got that down insanely well now, clear and easy to read. And yes, as you said, there's not too much else to adjust, but it's always comforting to know that I don't have to be a computer specialist to ride a bike like this. They have ABS anyway.
They don't have traction control.
They don't have traction control, but as you said, the tires are good and the performance is still easy to control. You didn't drive too fast. They did everything really well. Yes, as I said, I'm looking forward to the second part. I believe and hope that this fascination, which is actually also there with us, and I always say that if I have an entry-level bike like this, which is already aiming towards the mid-range and can actually take aim at all the bikes with 100 horsepower, then this CP2 engine is the gold standard, which really pushes from below and is fun everywhere, even when revving out. Yes, as I said, the second part will follow shortly. Philip, thank you. I think we've summed up the fascination quite well. Thank you for watching for now. Please subscribe to our 1000 PS YouTube channel. Then you'll get the second part and all our videos as soon as they go online. Give us a thumbs up for the 2 CP2 models and of course in anticipation of the others. Feel free to share the video with family and friends, whoever is interested in the CP2 engine. And yes, thanks for listening and watching.
Goodbye.